The labyrinth didn't care about courage. It only respected physics. And, even then, just barely. Kalen Vance felt the protest of his ship, the stray dog, as a deep shudder in his bones, a metallic groan that was more animal than machine. Outside the reinforced plasteel of the cockpit, reality was a torn canvas of churning gravimetric tides and searing radiation. This was a dead channel, an unmapped, unstable artery of the wormhole network the Concordance used to chain the galaxy together. Official doctrine claimed these routes were impassable, cosmic dead ends that would atomize any vessel foolish enough to enter. Doctrine was a lie, like most things the Concordance preached. The dead channels were navigable, but they demanded a toll in skill, luck, and spare parts. Kalen had a surplus of the first, a desperate need for the second, and a dwindling supply of the third. His ship was a testament to a life lived on the fringes, a salvager cobbled together from the bones of a dozen different wrecks. Its hull was a patchwork of scarred alloys. Its engines were a symphony of mismatched, over-torqued components. And its soul was pure, stubborn defiance. Like him. He wasn't a soldier or an explorer. He was a junk man, a vulture picking at the galactic carcass the Concordance left behind. It wasn't a noble living, but it was an honest one, which put him one step above the star-robed prelates who promised enlightenment while tightening their grip on every jump gate and trade route from Sol to the Sagittarius Arm. A sharp ping from the proximity sensor cut through the low thrum of the life support. It was a weak signal, intermittent and ghost-like, nearly swallowed by the channel's violent background noise. His first instinct was to ignore it. Ghosts in the dead channels were usually just echoes, phantom readings born from the chaotic energies that could trick a ship's systems into seeing things that weren't there. But this one was different. It held a pattern, a faint, rhythmic pulse that suggested manufactured origin. Against his better judgment, Kalen nudged the stray dog's maneuvering thrusters, easing the ship toward the source of the signal. Greed was a powerful motivator, and a derelict ship in a place no one was supposed to be could mean a life-changing score. The vessel that resolved out of the swirling chaos was unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't Concordance design, with their elegant, sterile curves that looked more like religious icons than starships. This thing was brutalist, a jagged wedge of dark, non-reflective metal that seemed to absorb the faint light of the channel. It was ancient, scarred with millennia of micrometeoroid impacts, yet its hull showed no signs of critical breach. It was a ship built not to travel through space, but to endure it. He docked the stray dog with a magnetic clamp that groaned under the strain, the two ships groaning in the turbulent currents like ancient sea creatures. The derelict's outer airlock cycled open with a surprising lack of resistance, hissing ancient, stale air into the void. Kalen stepped across the threshold, his pulse rifle held tight against his shoulder, the beam from his helmet lamp cutting a nervous swath through the oppressive darkness. The interior was a tomb. The corridors were wide, built for beings broader than humans, and coated in a fine layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in centuries. He found the crew, or what was left of them. They weren't in seats or bunks, but were fused into the very walls of the ship, their bodies grotesquely elongated and twisted into the metal bulkheads as if some impossible force had tried to turn the ship inside out with them still inside. There were no signs of violence, no weapon burns or explosive decompression. It was as if their biology had simply failed to keep up with something the ship had done. He pushed deeper, drawn by the same faint energy signature his ship's sensors had detected. At the heart of the vessel, in a chamber that felt more like a sanctuary than a bridge. He found it. It was a black, crystalline spire humming with a low, resonant energy. It wasn't a reactor core or a drive system. It was a repository, a library of some kind. As he approached, holographic symbols in a language he couldn't comprehend flickered across its surface. His wrist-mounted scanner, a tool he'd built himself for cracking open stubborn data vaults, interfaced with the spire. He expected encryption, firewalls, the usual digital defenses. He got none of it. The moment the connection was established, the spire responded not by feeding him data, but by seizing the link and shoving its contents directly into his mind. Pain erupted behind his eyes, a white-hot spike of agony as millennia of information flooded his neural pathways. He saw stars being born and dying in seconds. He witnessed fleets of ships, vast armadas of the same brutalist design as the derelict, waging war across entire galaxies. He saw them fighting not with energy weapons, but with forces that bent space and time, weapons that could age a sun to a cinder or de-evolve a species back into primordial ooze. And he saw who they were fighting, beings of pure light and geometry, creatures that looked hauntingly like the idealized forms depicted in Concordance holy texts. Then came the final memory, the one that broke through his consciousness and seared itself into his soul. He saw a planet of green and blue, a world teeming with life, a world that looked achingly familiar. He saw the brutalist fleet, his people, falling back to this world, making a final, desperate stand. He saw the beings of light descend, not with fire and fury, but with a wave of absolute power that didn't destroy, but rewrote. It changed everything, from the planet's history to the very genetic code of its inhabitants, bearing their true nature under layers of manufactured frailty and forgetfulness. It was a memory of defeat. It was a memory of Earth. He was ripped from the vision, gasping on the cold deck of the ship. The spire now silent. His head throbbed, but the knowledge remained, a poison and a revelation. Humanity wasn't a new species, a chaotic upstart the Concordance had graciously uplifted into the galactic community. They were the survivors of a lost war, the defeated remnant of an empire so vast and powerful the Concordance had to erase it from history itself. And this ship, this Genesis archive, was the last uncorrupted record of that truth. He staggered back to his feet, a cold dread washing over him. This wasn't a salvage score. This was a death sentence. As if on cue, a piercing alarm shrieked through the stray dog's external comms. A Concordance vessel had just translated from the labyrinth into the dead channel, right on top of his position. It wasn't one of their lumbering patrol craft. It was an Inquisitor-class interceptor, a blade of silver and white light, all sharp angles and weapon emplacements. They didn't use call signs. Their message cut through the static with chilling, resonant clarity. A voice that was both melodic and utterly menacing. Vessel of corruption, it chimed. You have trespassed upon sacred ground and communed with heresy. Surrender your ship and your soul for purification. The Concordance is merciful. Kalen knew what that mercy looked like. It looked like a plasma burn through the back of the head. He scrambled back to the stray dog. The archive's data already burning through his ship's firewalls and integrating with its systems. The Genesis archive wasn't just a record, it was an operating system, a weapon, and it was now fused with his ship. He slammed the airlock shut, the magnetic clamps disengaging with a percussive bang. Vera, he growled, speaking to the ship's rudimentary AI. Get us out of here. Full power to the engines. Forget the safety protocols. The AI, her voice usually a calm, synthesized monotone, came back with a flicker of something new, something alien. Protocols irrelevant. New directives received from Genesis. The stray dog's engines roared, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't the strained whine of overworked machinery. It was a deep, guttural roar that vibrated with power he didn't know the ship possessed. The ship lurched forward, accelerating at a rate that should have torn it, and him, to pieces. The Inquisitor, caught off guard by the salvager's impossible speed, opened fire. Lances of pure white energy sliced through the space where the stray dog had been moments before. Kalen wrestled with the controls, his body screaming in protest against the crushing G-forces. The Genesis archive was feeding him tactical data, showing him the stress points in the channel's fabric, the momentary, fleeting paths through the chaos that were invisible to concordant sensors. He was no longer just flying, he was dancing with the storm. The Inquisitor was faster, more agile, but it was predictable. It moved with the cold logic of a machine, while Kalen, guided by the ghost of an ancient warrior race, moved with desperate, savage instinct. He skimmed the edge of a gravitational shear, letting the wave of distorted space slam into the Inquisitor's shields, causing them to flare and flicker. He dove through the heart of a plasma storm, the stray dog's hull glowing cherry red, knowing the Inquisitor's delicate sensors would be blinded. But he was only delaying the inevitable. The Inquisitor was closing the distance, its weapons locking on. A final, sanctimonious message cut through his comms. Your struggle is profane. Your existence is an error. The labyrinth will be your tomb. He was boxed in. Ahead, a collapsing wormhole bled raw energy into the channel. To port and starboard were dense fields of crystallized temporal fragments. Behind him, the Inquisitor was preparing a killing blow. There was nowhere to run. Vera, he breathed, his vision tunneling. Is there anything left? The AI's voice was eerily calm. The archive contains one final navigation option, a blind jump. It bypasses conventional labyrinth transits. Probability of vessel integrity is 4.7%. Probability of occupant survival is indeterminate. Indeterminate. Better than 0. Do it, Kalen commanded. The ship's core, now glowing with an unnatural blue light from the archive's influence, began to scream. The space in front of the stray dog didn't open, it fractured. The universe seemed to crack like glass, revealing not blackness, but a blinding, infinite whiteness. The ship plunged into the fracture just as the Inquisitor's weapons fired, the energy beams dissipating harmlessly against the closing wound in space. The transition was not a jump, it was a demolition. Kalen felt as if every molecule in his body was being simultaneously pulled apart and crushed together. His vision dissolved into static, and the last thing he heard before consciousness fled was the archive's voice whispering in his mind, not with data or tactics, but with a single, resonant word that felt like a promise and a curse. Awaken. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a violent home invasion. Kalen was first aware of the pain, a chorus of agony from every nerve ending. His head felt like a cracked bell. His ribs were a mesh of fire, and the coppery taste of blood filled his mouth. He was pinned to his command chair, held in place by the emergency restraints that had likely saved his life. Through a fractured cockpit viewport, He saw a kaleidoscope of neon haze, drifting debris, and the distant, indifferent glitter of stars. He had survived. The stray dog had survived. He tried to take a breath and choked. A wet, ragged sound that spoke of internal injuries. Emergency alerts flickered weakly across a single, functioning console, their frantic red strobes painting his face in a grim tableau. The ship was a wreck. The blind jump had been less a feat of navigation and more an act of controlled demolition. Hull integrity was at 19%. The main reactor was leaking hard radiation, and life support was running on a battery that had about an hour of life left. Yet, the ship was not dead. A low, unfamiliar hum resonated through the deck plates, a sound that was deeper and more vital than the stray dog's usual death rattle. It was the Genesis archive. Kalen unstrapped himself, his body screaming in protest, and fell to the floor. He crawled, dragging himself toward the engineering section, the visions from the archive swirling at the edge of his awareness, star-spanning fleets, worlds of glass and light, and the crushing, final silence of his ancestors' defeat. The archive was not just a data core. It had become the ship's heart, its crystalline structure, once a deep, passive black, now pulsed with a soft, internal blue light, and fine, thread-like conduits of the same energy had woven themselves through the ship's systems, bypassing fried circuits and reinforcing stressed metal like luminous scar tissue. The stray dog was healing itself. "Vera," he croaked, his voice raw. The AI's reply was instantaneous, her voice no longer a simple synthesized monotone, but a layered chorus of calm logic and something ancient, something resonant. "I am here, Kalen. The vessel sustained critical damage during the non-Euclidean transit. Self-repair protocols are active. The occupant's biological integrity is compromised. Multiple fractures, internal hemorrhaging, elevated radiation levels. Medical intervention is advised." He pulled himself up, leaning against a humming bulkhead. Where are we? The main viewport screen flickered to life, displaying a chaotic, breathtaking vista. They were docked, or rather, magnetically clamped, to the corroded hull of a colossal space station. It was a monstrosity of engineering, a chaotic accretion of modules, habitats, and derelict ship hulls fused together over centuries, stretching for miles in every direction. It looked like a city built from a galactic junkyard, illuminated by a chaotic swarm of blinking signs, engine flares, and the occasional plasma discharge from a back-alley dispute. "Location identified," Vera's new voice announced. "This is Port Requiem, a non-aligned, autonomous trade hub located in the Umbral sector. No Concordance presence is officially recorded, though their influence is probable. It is a sanctuary for criminals, exiles, and refugees. A fitting place for a ghost." Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with his injuries. Port Requiem was a legend, a place you heard about in hushed whispers in the darkest corners of the galaxy. It was a black market for everything from illegal gene mods to decommissioned warships. It was a place where lives were cheap and secrets were the only real currency. And right now, he was carrying the biggest secret in the history of the universe. He needed parts, medgel, and reactor sealant, and he needed them an hour ago. That meant leaving the relative safety of his ship and venturing into the belly of the beast. He patched himself up as best he could with his depleted medkit, wrapping his ribs until his breath came in shallow, painful gasps, and injecting a broad-spectrum stimulant that set his teeth on edge. He donned a heavy, hooded long coat to hide the contours of his salvager's rig and the pistol strapped to his thigh, then limped to the airlock. As he cycled it open, Vera spoke again, a note of caution in her layered voice. The Archive's energy signature is unique. It is not shielded by the vessel's damaged hull. Be wary. Others may feel its resonance. The station's interior was a sensory assault. The air was a thick soup of recycled oxygen, ozone, spilled fuel, and 1,000 alien spices. The main concourse was a river of bodies, a chaotic flow of beings from every known species, and a few he'd only seen in xenobiology texts. Four-armed Grolock mercenaries pushed past slender, insectoid traders, while hooded figures with glowing eyes watched from shadowy alcoves. The ceaseless noise of haggling, machinery, and a dozen different alien languages echoed off the grimy metal walls. He kept his head down, moving with the practiced shuffle of someone who didn't want to be noticed. But Vera had been right. He could feel it now, a subtle hum in the back of his mind. The Archive's presence like a beacon. And he felt the return signal, the flicker of attention from a passing psychic, the lingering stare of a cyborg with enhanced optical sensors, the way a hulking reptilian bounty hunter sniffed the air as he passed. He wasn't just another broken salvager looking for parts. He was an anomaly, a mystery. And in a place like Port Requiem, mysteries were either solved or dissected for profit. He found a parts dealer in a cramped, greasy stall at the edge of the market district, a being named Grisk who was more machine than flesh, with multiple optical sensors that whirred as they scanned Kalen from head to toe. Reactor sealant. Concordance grade. Kalen grunted, sliding a few chipped, untraceable credit slugs onto the counter. Grisk's metallic fingers scooped up the slugs, his main optic glowing red as he analyzed them. Price has gone up. Concordance tech is getting harder to source. Supply and demand. He named a price that was triple the going rate. Kalen's jaw tightened. He didn't have it. That's extortion. Grisk let out a sound like grinding gears that might have been a laugh. On Port Requiem, we call it business. Don't like it. Go find a concordance supply depot. I hear they're very generous. Before Kalen could argue, two figures detached themselves from the shadows behind him. They were both human, which was rare in these parts, and built like industrial presses. Their faces a roadmap of scars and bad decisions. They wore the faded, stylized insignia of the Crimson Suns, the dominant human gang on the station, run by a ruthless tyrant named Silas Rorn. The boss wants a word, the larger one said, his voice a low rumble. He's very interested in new arrivals, especially ones in ships that don't belong. Kalen's hand instinctively moved toward his pistol. I'm just passing through. Yes, that's what they all say. The second one sneered, stepping to block his path. Now you can come with us nice and quiet, or we can drag your corpse. Rorn pays either way, but the second option is more fun for us. He had no choice. They led him away from the bustling market, down a series of dark, dripping maintenance corridors where the station's gilded facade gave way to its rusted, decaying skeleton. In the silence between the clank of their boots, Kalen felt the Archive whisper in his mind. It wasn't a voice. It was a surge of pure, tactical data. He saw the structural weaknesses in the corridor walls, the fluctuating power levels in the conduit running overhead, The precise angle of his captors' bodies and their projected lines of attack, an instinct he'd never felt before, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, took hold. When they rounded a corner into an empty junction, he moved. He dropped low, sweeping the legs out from under the man in front, whose surprise was a fleeting expression before his head hit the metal deck with a sickening crack. The second man turned, reaching for his weapon, but Kalen was already inside his guard. His movements were fluid, economical, utterly lethal. An elbow strike to the throat, a palm heel to the nose, a disarming maneuver that twisted the man's wrist until the bone snapped. It was over in 3 seconds. He stood over the two groaning men, breathing heavily, his own body screaming from the exertion. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was the echo of a power he didn't understand. He hadn't just fought. He had executed a combat protocol that was as alien to him as the creatures in the market. He was Kalen Vance, the junk man. But a moment ago, he had been something else, a soldier. He stripped them of their credits and a spare power pack, enough to buy what he needed from Grisk and then some, and melted back into the shadows. He knew he was on borrowed time. Silas Rorn wouldn't take this insult lying down. He had to get the repairs done and leave Port Requiem before the Crimson Suns hunted him down. As he navigated the labyrinthine corridors back towards the docking bay, a public comm screen, usually displaying garish advertisements for cheap booze and gladiator fights, flickered to static. A new image appeared, sharp and pristine, cutting through the station's grime. It was the face of a Concordance Inquisitor, serene and beautiful in its ascetic severity, its silver eyes radiating cold, absolute conviction. Its voice, amplified and broadcast across every open channel on the station, was the same melodic, chilling tone he'd heard in the Dead Channel. Inhabitants of Port Requiem, it chimed. A great heresy festers in your midst. A man named Kalen Vance, a thief and a blasphemer, has stolen prescribed technology and fled into your sanctuary. He is an agent of chaos, a blight upon the sacred order. Kalen froze in the shadows, his blood turning to ice. The Inquisitor's face was replaced by a grainy, enhanced image of his own, taken from some old docking registration. The Concordance, in its infinite mercy, offers a reward, 5 million standard credits for his capture. Alive, 10 million for proof of his purification and the recovery of his vessel. The stray dog. Do not harbor the heretic. Do not aid him. Earn your salvation. Cleanse the stain. The message ended, and the regular advertisements flickered back on. But the atmosphere on the station had changed. The background noise dropped for a moment, replaced by a collective, hungry silence. Heads turned. Eyes scanned the crowds. Every desperate soul on Port Requiem, from the lowest gutter scrapper to the most powerful gang lord, now had a price on his head. He was no longer just a mystery. He was the biggest lottery ticket in the sector. He was prey. The hunt began not with a bang, but with 1,000 avaricious whispers. Kalen saw the change in the way people looked at him, the casual glances that lingered a fraction of a second too long, the way conversations died as he passed. 10 million credits was more than a fortune on Port Requiem. It was a myth, a ticket to a life none of them could even properly imagine. It was enough to turn a city of thieves and killers into a single, ravenous organism. He had to get back to the stray dog. He abandoned the main concourses, sticking to the grimy, rust-streaked service tunnels that formed the station's bowels. The air down here was thick with the stench of leaking coolant and biological waste, and the only light came from the flickering emergency strobes and the bioluminescent fungi that grew in patches along the damp walls. He moved with a newfound stealth, the archive in his mind feeding him a constant stream of environmental data. It highlighted the creaking floor panels before he stepped on them, mapped the patrol routes of the station's automated sanitation drones, and even predicted the subtle shifts in air pressure that signaled an opening door around a blind corner. It was a terrifying intimacy with his surroundings, as if the station itself were whispering its secrets to him. He was a ghost in the machine, but he wasn't the only hunter in the dark. A flicker of movement in a side tunnel. Kalen flattened himself into a recessed alcove just as a trio of bounty hunters, a hulking, four-armed Growlock and two slender insectoid assassins, crept past. Their comms were on an open channel, their whispered conversation cutting through the low hum of the station, where signal is strongest this way. Smells like ozone and fear. The Growlock rumbled. The Inquisitor's reward is ours. Kalen held his breath, the cold metal of his pistol a stark comfort against his palm. He could take them. The combat protocols were already spooling up in his mind, a cold, clean fire of lethal efficiency. He saw the fight laid out before him like a schematic 3 shots. 2 seconds, one less problem. But the archive, for the first time, offered a different solution. Not an attack, but an alternative. A surge of data flooded his senses, overlaying his vision with the station's power grid. It showed him a junction box on the far wall, a primary conduit that powered the lighting and life support for this entire sector. It also showed him its overload point. He holstered his pistol, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his bruised ribs. He wasn't a soldier. He was a junk man. He knew machines. He pulled a multi-tool from his coat pocket and, with a silent prayer to whatever gods of salvage still listened, set to work on the junction box's control panel. He rerouted the energy flow, creating a feedback loop that sent a massive power surge down the line. 100 yards away, the lights in the bounty hunter's tunnel exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging them into absolute darkness and triggering a cascade of screeching alarms. He didn't wait to see the result, already sprinting in the opposite direction, the sounds of their confused shouts and weapon discharges fading behind him. He had outthought them, not outfought them. It was a small victory, but it felt more like his own than the cold, alien precision of the archive's combat knowledge. He reached the docking sector, his lungs burning, his body a symphony of pain. The bay where he'd left the stray dog was no longer empty. A cordon of Crimson Sun's thugs had surrounded his ship, their heavy plasma rifles held at the ready. At their center stood Silas Rorn, a man whose reputation was as scarred and ugly as his face. He was tall and wire-thin, dressed in a patched, once elegant spacer's coat, a cruel smile playing on his lips as he admired the battered hull of the stray dog. "Look at this piece of junk," Rorn sneered to his men, loud enough for Kalen to hear from his hiding spot behind a stack of cargo containers. "Hard to believe it's worth 10 million credits. Get the cutting torches. I want whatever's inside that rust bucket, and I want it now." Kalen was trapped. A direct assault was suicide. He was 1 man against 20, and his body was already failing. He leaned back against the container, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The stimulant was wearing off, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. This was it. This was how it ended. It wasn't fair. The injustice of it all burned hotter than his injuries. He had stumbled upon a truth that could shatter the concordance, a truth his ancestors had died to protect, and he was going to die in a greasy docking bay, killed by a common thug for a prize he didn't even fully understand. Kalen. Vera's voice whispered, not through the comm in his ear, but directly in his mind. The connection was clearer now, stronger. The vessel's repairs are 68% complete. The drive is operational, but the hull cannot withstand atmospheric pressures or sustained weapons fire. A direct escape is not viable. Tell me something I don't know, he thought, his despair a bitter taste in his mouth. The archive is not merely a record, the voice continued, calm and resonant. It is a key. It can interface with any system derived from its core technology. The Concordance's entire infrastructure is a corrupted echo of our own. A new schematic flooded his mind. It wasn't for his ship. It was for the docking bay's primary systems, the magnetic clamps holding the stray dog in place, the massive outer doors that led to the void, and, most importantly, the station's localized gravity generators. "You're not going to like this," Kalen muttered to himself, a desperate, half-mad grin spreading across his face. He began to move, a shadow slipping between containers, his multi-tool once again in hand. He wasn't just a junk man anymore. He was a saboteur. The first sign of trouble for the Crimson Suns was when the docking bay's emergency lighting suddenly cut out, replaced by the ominous, pulsing red of a containment breach alarm. Rorn spun around, his hand on his sidearm. What in the void is that? Before his men could answer, the magnetic clamps holding the stray dog released with a deafening clang. The ship, no longer secured to the station, began to drift slowly, silently, away from its mooring. "Get it back," Rorn roared, but his orders were lost in a new, terrifying sound, the groan of tortured metal as the bay's colossal outer doors began to slide open. Panic erupted. They were exposed to the void. The thugs scrambled, some trying to get a magnetic grapple on the drifting ship, others fumbling with emergency helmets. They were a disorganized mob, their discipline shattered by the sudden chaos. And then Kalen played his final card. He sent the command to the station's gravity generator, not to turn it off, but to reverse its polarity. For a gut-wrenching second, the world turned upside down. The artificial gravity that held everything to the floor vanished, replaced by a powerful force that pushed everything up. Unsecured cargo containers, tools, and gang members were flung toward the ceiling, which had suddenly become the new floor. Men screamed as they were slammed against the overhead gantries and light fixtures. Silas Rorn, caught completely off guard, was thrown upwards, his head connecting with a solid steel beam with a sickening crunch. He dropped, unconscious, back onto the deck as the gravity field sputtered and died, leaving the entire bay in a state of zero-G chaos. In that moment of weightless pandemonium, the stray dog's main engines flared to life. The ship, guided by Vera, gracefully pivoted and shot through the open bay doors, its battered hull a testament to its stubborn refusal to die. Kalen, using his own mag boots to stay anchored, pushed off the last container and launched himself through the void toward his ship's open airlock. He sailed through the silent blackness, the chaos of the docking bay receding behind him, the station's neon glow a smear of color against the infinite night. He hit the edge of the airlock hard, his fingers scrabbling for a handhold. He hauled himself inside, sealing the door just as the first few scattered shots from the surviving gang members pinged harmlessly off the hull. He collapsed onto the deck, his body finally surrendering to the pain and exhaustion. The ship was moving, accelerating away from Port Requiem, away from the hunt. He had done it. He had escaped. But as the ship righted itself and the internal gravity hummed back to life, a new alarm began to blare, this one far more urgent than the others. "Warning," Vera's voice announced, her tone edged with something that sounded almost like concern. "Concordance vessel has translated into the system. Inquisitor class. It is hailing us." Kalen dragged himself back to the cockpit. On the main screen, the sleek, silver form of the Inquisitor ship hung in space, a predator waiting patiently for its wounded prey to bleed out. He had escaped the station, but he had flown directly into the arms of the true believers. The Inquisitor's voice, devoid of its earlier sanctimony, now cold and sharp as obsidian, filled the cockpit. "Heretic, your profane struggle is over. You cannot run. You cannot hide. We have followed the cry of the abomination you carry. Surrender the archive, and we will grant you the mercy of a quick death." Kalen looked at the fractured viewport, at the enemy ship that represented an entire galaxy of lies and dogma. He looked at the pulsing blue light of the archive, now an integral part of his own ship's soul. He was just a junk man, but he was the last junk man in the universe who knew the truth, and he wasn't going to die on his knees. "Vera," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Take us back into the dead channel, the one we came through. The vessel's structural integrity is insufficient. The channel's gravimetric shears will tear us apart." "Not if we're not solid," Kalen countered, an idea born of desperation and the archive's alien knowledge blooming in his mind. "The Genesis technology, it can manipulate space, warp it. Theoretically, the power required would be immense. It would drain the archive and the ship's core completely, leaving us adrift." "Better adrift than purified," Kalen said, his hands gripping the controls. "Prepare for a partial phase shift. We're going to show them a ghost they won't forget." The stray dog, bleeding plasma and trailing debris, turned its nose away from the Inquisitor and plunged back toward the churning, chaotic maw of the dead channel, a place where only madmen and ghosts dared to fly. The dead channel welcomed them back with a symphony of violence. Gravimetric tides, like the fists of an angry god, pounded against the stray dog's already failing hull. The ship screamed, a chorus of groaning metal and the shriek of protesting systems. Kalen was strapped so tightly into his chair that his bones ached, his knuckles white as he fought to keep the ship from being torn apart. The Inquisitor was right behind them, a silver shark in a sea of chaos, its sleek form effortlessly navigating the turbulence that threatened to atomize the smaller salvager. "Phase shift initiated," Vera's voice announced. A point of calm in the swirling vortex of destruction, diverting all power from non-essential systems. Shields are offline. Weapons are offline. Life support is at minimum. A deep, resonant hum, lower and more profound than any engine noise, filled the ship. The blue light from the Genesis archive intensified, pouring out of the engineering section and casting the entire cockpit in an ethereal glow. Outside, the fabric of the stray dog began to shimmer, its edges blurring as if it were a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The ship was vibrating at an impossible frequency. its very atomic structure becoming unstable. It wasn't just moving through the dead channel, it was becoming part of it. The first of the Inquisitors' energy lances passed straight through their stern, harmlessly traversing the space their ship had occupied a microsecond before. Kalen let out a ragged, disbelieving laugh. It was working. They were intangible. A ghost ship haunting the cosmic storm. The Inquisitor, its cold logic unable to process what its sensors were reporting, fired again and again, its beams of pure energy slicing through the phased-out vessel without effect. "They can't touch us," Kalen breathed, a surge of adrenaline momentarily washing away his pain and exhaustion. "But we're bleeding power," Vera countered, her voice now strained. "The archive cannot maintain this state for long. We have 94 seconds of phase state remaining before total power depletion." 94 seconds. It felt like a lifetime, and no time at all. He couldn't outrun the Inquisitor, and he couldn't stay a ghost forever. His mind raced, the archive feeding him a torrent of possibilities, not as tactical options, but as pure physics. He saw the chaotic energy of the dead channel not as a threat, but as a power source. He saw the Inquisitor's powerful shields not as a defense, but as a containment vessel, a wild, desperate idea, the kind that only a man with nothing left to lose could conceive, took shape in his mind. "Vera," he commanded, his voice tight with focus. "Can you create a focused gravimetric shear, a small one? Use the phase coil to manipulate the channel's existing energy." "The calculations are complex," the AI responded. "The risk of creating a feedback loop that would destroy us is 87%. Just tell me if you can do it." There was a pause, a millisecond of processing that felt like an eternity. "Yes, I can create a directed, short-lived anomaly. Its effects would be unpredictable." "Good," Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the Inquisitor that was now pacing them, its weapons temporarily silent as it tried to solve the riddle of the ghost ship. "Target their primary shield generator. We're not going to run. We're going to give them exactly what they came for." He pushed the stray dog into a hard, gut-wrenching turn, bringing them onto a collision course with their pursuer. To the Inquisitor, it must have looked like a final, desperate act of suicide. Their comms crackled to life, the Inquisitor's voice laced with a faint hint of surprise. "You choose annihilation. Heretic, a fitting end." "We're not the ones who are going to be annihilated," Kalen growled, more to himself than to the enemy. "Vera, now." The stray dog dropped out of its phase state just yards from the Inquisitor's bow. For a heart-stopping moment, they were solid again, a battered, vulnerable piece of junk in the path of a pristine warship. Alarm shrieked as the Inquisitor's automated point defense systems opened fire, peppering their hull with plasma bursts. But it was too late. The archive discharged its energy, not as a weapon, but as a catalyst. It didn't fire a shot. It reached out and squeezed the fabric of the dead channel itself. A localized, violent ripple of space-time erupted between the two ships. The anomaly, a swirling vortex of pure gravitational force, slammed into the Inquisitor's shields. The shields, designed to deflect energy and matter, had no protocol for deflecting a distortion in reality. They held for a second, then warped, buckled, and collapsed, the gravimetric shear tearing them apart from the inside out. The Inquisitor was suddenly naked in the heart of the storm. The full, untamed fury of the dead channel, which the ship's advanced systems had been effortlessly compensating for, hit it all at once. Kalen watched in stunned silence as the elegant warship was tossed about like a child's toy. Hull plates buckled. The graceful silver spire of its command tower twisted and snapped. A chain reaction of explosions ripped through its spine, its own powerful core going critical under the impossible strain. The Inquisitor didn't just explode, it was erased, consumed by the very chaos it had sought to master. The backlash from the anomaly hit the stray dog like a hammer blow. The last of their power died, plunging the ship into darkness and silence. They were adrift, a dead husk in the most dangerous stretch of space known to man. But they were alive, and they were alone. For days, Kalen drifted. He was a castaway on an ocean of churning space-time. He survived on emergency rations and the ship's last dregs of recycled water. He spent his time patching the worst of the hull breaches with sealant and sheer willpower, and tending to his own wounds, which were slowly, stubbornly beginning to heal. In the silence, the archive spoke to him. It no longer felt like an alien intelligence. Its voice and Vera's had merged, becoming a single, seamless consciousness that was now as much a part of the ship as its engines. It didn't just feed him data, it shared its memories, its sorrow, its ancient, burning rage. He learned his people's true name, the Architects. A race of explorers and builders who had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe, not for conquest, but for creation. He learned that the labyrinth, the Concordance's sacred network of wormholes, was their creation, a galactic highway they had built to seed life across the stars. And he learned that the beings of light who had defeated them were a parasitic, mimetic life form called the Chorus. They didn't conquer planets. They infected cultures, twisting belief systems into weapons, turning faith into a cage. The Concordance was their masterpiece, a galaxy-spanning religion built on the ashes of the civilization they had destroyed. A lie so profound that even its jailers believed they were saviors. He wasn't just the heir to a forgotten war, he was the survivor of a conceptual genocide. One day, as he was patching a conduit in the darkened engineering bay, a single light flickered to life, then another, the soft, blue hum of the archive returned. Weak at first, then growing steadily stronger. "What's happening?" he asked the darkness. "The archive is self-sustaining," the merged voice of Vera replied. "It is converting the ambient radiation of the channel into usable energy. It is a slow process, but we are no longer dying." Hope, a feeling he had long since abandoned, flickered in his chest. "How much power can you generate?" "Enough to sustain life support indefinitely. Enough to reactivate short-range communications. Not enough for a jump. Not yet." It was enough. Kalen made his way to the cockpit and powered up the comms console. He didn't broadcast on open channels. He sent a single, tightly encrypted data burst, not to a place, but to a concept. He sent it to the network of smugglers, exiles, and rebels who lived in the cracks of the Concordance's perfect society. He sent it to every soul who had ever been branded a heretic for asking the wrong questions. He sent them the truth. He sent them the Genesis Archive's uncorrupted history of the galaxy, a record of the Architects, the Chorus, and the Great Lie. He attached a single, personal message. "My name is Kalen Vance. I am the last son of a forgotten world. The Concordance told you they brought enlightenment to the galaxy. They lied. They are a plague, and their faith is a cage. I have the proof, and I have a weapon. The masters of the labyrinth are returning. Find me. He didn't know if anyone would receive it. He didn't know if anyone would believe it. But as he stared out at the chaotic beauty of the dead channel, he felt a profound sense of peace. The junk man was gone, stripped away by pain and fire and truth. In his place was something new, something forged in the heart of a dead starship and the memory of a lost empire. He was a ghost, an echo, a heretic, and his war was just beginning. The silence that followed Kalen's broadcast was a living thing, a vast, galaxy-spanning void that seemed to swallow his message whole. For weeks, he drifted through the dead channel, the stray dog slowly regenerating, its wounds being healed by the patient, persistent energy of the archive. He was a man on a ghost ship in an ocean of nowhere, armed with a truth that could either liberate the galaxy or get him erased from existence for good. He had thrown a spark into the void, and now all he could do was wait to see if it would catch fire or simply die out. The first response came not as a message, but as a ghost. A small, heavily modified scout ship. Its transponder codes scrambled, and its hull painted a non-reflective, sensor dead black, dropped out of a short-lived wormhole just off their port bow. It made no attempt to communicate, simply matching their slow, aimless drift. Kalen's hand went to his pistol. The cold, lethal combat protocols of the archive rising in his mind. But Vera's voice was calm, a steadying presence in his thoughts. Their drive signature is non-concordance. It's a hybrid system, cobbled together from at least 3 different species technologies. Their weapons are powered down. They are not a threat. They are listening. Over the next cycle, more ships arrived. They came in 1s and 2s, a strange and motley fleet of the dispossessed. There was a hulking freighter captained by a crew of genetically engineered Orcs, a species the Concordance had declared biologically profane and sentenced to exile. There was a squadron of sleek, razor-winged fighters flown by former members of the Cathar Royal Guard, a warrior race that had been brutally pacified and disarmed for resisting Concordance doctrine. There was a medical frigate run by a collective of sentient AI, a form of life the Concordance considered an abomination. They were the outcasts, the heretics, the survivors. They were a fleet of broken pieces, united only by their shared hatred of the perfect, sterile order that had cast them out. Their leader, the one who finally opened a communication channel, was a woman named Aris Thorn. She appeared on his main screen not as a pristine hologram, but as a grainy, flickering image that spoke of a ship that valued function over form. She was human. Her face a stark landscape of sharp angles and old scars. Her eyes holding the weary, intelligent light of someone who had been fighting a losing war her entire life. She was the commander of the Free Coalition, a name that was far grander than the reality of her ragtag alliance. "We received your message." "Vance," she said. Her voice a low, gravelly alto. "The whole damn fringe sector did. Half of them think you're a Concordance plant spreading disinformation. The other half think you're a madman. I'm not sure at which half I'm in yet." "Did you look at the data?" Kalen asked, his own voice hoarse from disuse. "We looked," she admitted, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "The history of the architects, the mimetic plague called the chorus. It's a lot to swallow. It sounds like a ghost story. Every ghost story is the echo of something that died screaming." Kalen replied. "The Concordance didn't just defeat the architects. They erased them. They rewrote history and called the new version faith. Eris was silent for a long moment, her gaze searching his. "You said you have a weapon." "I do," Kalen confirmed. He let Vera project a schematic into the data stream, a visual representation of the Labyrinth network, not as a series of disconnected points, but as a single, integrated system, a galactic circuit board. The Concordance thinks they control the Labyrinth. They don't. They're just users. The Genesis Archive holds the master key, the administrative command. We can't just use the Labyrinth, we can rewrite it. The implications of his words hung in the silent space between their two ships. He wasn't talking about simple rebellion, about raids and skirmishes. He was talking about seizing the very foundation of the Concordance's power. He was talking about turning their greatest strength into their greatest vulnerability. A plan began to form. A desperate, audacious gamble that could only have been born in the heart of a dead channel. They wouldn't attack the Concordance's military fleets or fortified worlds. They would attack its soul. Their target was a place called Sanctum, the Concordance's holy capital. A planet-sized temple built around the main nexus of the Labyrinth network. It was the most heavily defended location in the galaxy, not just with warships, but with faith. Billions of pilgrims traveled there, their belief a palpable, psychic shield that was said to be impenetrable. "It's suicide," Eris said flatly when he laid out the plan. "No fleet, no matter how large, has ever made it past the outer system." "We're not going as a fleet," Kalen said. "We're going as a ghost." The plan was insane. They would use the combined power of the Stray Dogs archive and the energy cores of the Coalition's ships to create a massive, non-Euclidean transit, a blind jump that would bypass Sanctum's outer defenses entirely and drop them directly into orbit. It was a move so reckless, so contrary to every known law of physics and military strategy, that the Concordance would never see it coming. As the Coalition fleet gathered in the chaotic heart of the dead channel, a strange sense of community began to form. Engineers from a dozen different species worked together to synchronize their ships' power cores, their shared knowledge overcoming the barriers of language and biology. Pilots shared navigation data, and strategists debated attack vectors. They were no longer just a collection of exiles. They were an army, forged in the fires of a shared truth. The day of the assault, Kalen stood on the bridge of the Stray Dog, the fleet of misfit ships arrayed around him. He looked at Oris's determined face on his screen. "Ready?" she asked. "Born ready," he lied, his heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs. The jump was a cataclysm. Kalen felt the universe turn inside out as the combined power of the fleet tore a hole in reality. The Stray Dog groaned, the archive screaming as it channeled an impossible amount of energy. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of light and color, and then, with a deafening, bone-jarring lurch, they were back in normal space. Below them hung Sanctum. It was a world of breathtaking, sterile beauty, its continents sculpted into perfect geometric patterns, its oceans a placid, uniform blue, a web of golden energy. The physical manifestation of the Labyrinth Nexus encased the planet. The sudden appearance of the Coalition fleet threw the holy world into chaos. Alarms blared across the system. The vaunted Sanctum Defense Fleet, caught completely by surprise, scrambled to respond. But Kalen's plan was not about a conventional battle. "Vera," he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "It's time to wake the ghosts. Broadcast to the archive, on every channel, to every ship, every station, every world connected to this nexus. Give them their history back. The Genesis Archive unleashed its truth, the uncorrupted history of the architects, the revelation of the chorus, the great lie at the heart of the concordance. It flooded the galactic network. It was not a message. It was a deprogramming. On the bridges of the concordance warships, crew members stared in stunned silence as the truth of their faith was laid bare. On the planet below, billions of pilgrims saw the images of the brutal, final war, or of the rewriting of their own species' history. The psychic shield of belief that had protected Sanctum for millennia didn't just fail, it shattered. Faith, when broken, does not simply disappear. It curdles into doubt, then rage. The Sanctum fleet, thrown into doctrinal chaos, turned on itself. Ships whose crews clung to the old faith fired on those who now saw the truth. A civil war erupted in the heart of the concordance, a firestorm of their own making. Kalen watched the battle rage below. A conflict fought not just with weapons, but with ideas. His coalition fleet moved in, not to conquer, but to liberate, aiding the mutineering concordance ships and breaking the back of the loyalist forces. He targeted the Nexus itself, using the archive not to destroy it, but to unlock it, severing the chorus's parasitic control and returning the labyrinth to its original, neutral state. In the end, Kalen found himself face to face with a High Inquisitor, the supreme commander of the Sanctum forces, whose ship he had boarded in the final, chaotic moments of the battle. The Inquisitor was a being of serene, terrifying conviction, his silver eyes burning with the cold fire of a dying star. "You have accomplished nothing, heretic," the Inquisitor hissed, a plasma blade humming in his hand. "You have traded order for chaos. You have destroyed 1,000 years of peace." "It wasn't peace," Kalen said, his own pulse rifle feeling heavy and crude in comparison. "It was a cage, and the door is open now. The fight was short and brutal. The Inquisitor was a master, his movements a deadly ballet. But Kalen was no longer just a junk man. He was the vessel of the architects, their rage and their sorrow flowing through him. He moved with an instinct that was millennia old, and when it was over, he stood alone. The Inquisitor's reign ended. The fall of Sanctum did not end the war, but it broke the back of the concordance. The galaxy, armed with the truth, descended into a chaotic, violent, but ultimately liberating period of revolution. Old empires crumbled, and new alliances were forged. The cage was broken, and its former prisoners were now free to build a future of their own making. Kalen Vance never sought to be a leader. When the fighting was done, he and the stray dog, now a legendary vessel known throughout the newly freed worlds, returned to the quiet spaces, to the dead channels and the forgotten corners of the galaxy. He became a guardian of the new, fragile peace, a ghost who hunted the remnants of the chorus, who still lurked in the shadows. He was a junk man who had stumbled upon a truth that had remade the stars, a living echo of a lost people, forever bound to his ship and the ancient, powerful soul within it. He was a heretic who had become a liberator, a single, stubborn voice who had reminded a galaxy of what it meant to be free.